It is your Classic Metal Show right here on the ClassicMetalShow.com. That is a CMS fan band called Iron Dragon. That, of course, is Pass the Pussy. And just before that, we heard some Stephen Pearcy from his last solo release, Smash, with Rain. And tonight, our good friend Bob Nalbandian is going to join me on the show. But apparently he's not paying attention to connect to me. So I'm going to connect to Bob and see if he'll pick up his end of the line here. But anyway, it is Neeley right here on your Classic Metal Show, along with my very good friend Bob Nalbandian. What's going on there, Bob?
Hey, Freddie, what's happening, man?
Were you not paying attention?
Oh, no, I was paying attention, Freddie. Why? Why do you say that?
I sent you the 1 minute warning.
Yes. You know, Freddie, it said 1 minute, and it kept saying 1 minute before, but I noticed those were the previous 1 minute warnings. Right. So now I see that was the current 1 minute warning. So, dude, good to talk to you, Freddie. How you been, man?
Freddie?
This is the Freddie Trunk podcast.
Oh, Freddie Trunk, that's right.
Yes, I have on my itinerary 6 hours with the Freddie Trunk podcast.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. We don't have to think of a good name for this show, don't you think, Neeley?
Yeah, you would think, but obviously in that instance, Jonathan Cain had no idea who Eddie Trunk was.
Yes, I heard that episode. It was quite funny.
Right, exactly. Well, anyway, tonight Bob is joining me as my co-host of the Classic Metal Show because Chris is off doing some things with the Pinball Palace. And Bob says he could step up to the mic and go toe-to-toe with Chris Aiken and withstand the full 6 hours. So you ready for a marathon, Bob?
Dude, I am more than ready, man. I've got my glass of wine here. I've got a pile of Coke, Tony Montana style, on my desk here. I got a handful of Quaaludes, uppers, downers, and I got 3 naked bitches spread eagle across the table. Dude, I am fucking ready. Let's do this shit.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you are in L.A. after all, and that would be the way that the 80s L.A. lifestyle used to be, right, Bob?
We're bringing this shit back, Neeley. There's no used to here, man. It's happening right here, right now. Let's do this.
All right. Well, since you brought that up, Bob, and I'm glad to have you as part of the show tonight, being the co-host, because you've lived a life or have been involved with things that so many of our fans may never have had an opportunity to partake in. Maybe they're too young to remember. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity to run around the L.A. area. I lived in L.A. myself between 85 and 91. You've lived there all of your life for the most part, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, so, and being that, if people are not familiar with Bob's body of work over the last 30-plus years, kind of give people a rundown where you kind of got started. You got started very early as a teen journalist, right?
Shit, you want me to go way back, Neeley? You gotta have me joggle my brain.
Well, you have street cred where it comes to being involved in a very early music scene, and you were a huge supporter of a lot of bands that went on to have some pretty good success, and you covered them very early in the clubs before anybody really knew who they were on a national level. And it was a passion of yours, still is, because of your current involvement with the documentary series and all the things that you're doing. So kind of give us a little brief rundown, where your earliest roots started, so people who, don't know your history will know that we have a worthy co-host here tonight.
Jesus, it took you that long to say that? You could have just said, Bob, you're an old motherfucker. Why don't you start from the beginning?
Well, I'd be having to look in the mirror in that case, Bob, because you and I are the same age. So
it's true. Well, yes, I it's funny. Those were great times. I mean, I think about it now, how fortunate I was to be if you think about it, in the 80s at the pinnacle of where everything started when it comes to like metal music. In LA and Orange County, I grew up in Huntington Beach, and when I was very young, fortunately I had a older cousin that turned me on to metal. Like when I was 9 years old, he was making me these cassette tapes. We're talking early 70s here of Sabbath, Zeppelin, Purple, cassette and 8-track tapes. I remember I had a compilation that had Zeppelin, Purple, Sabbath, Alice Cooper, Johnny Winter, David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, which I think had just come out then. 10 years after, Humble Pie, Rare Earth, he would just give me these compilation tapes, and I was just, Sabbath and Zeppelin were my, I just loved that shit. And so that got me going early on, which was great. And then, I had another cousin that was making more mainstream tapes and some, even some R&B, Sly and the Family Stone and that kind of stuff, and more mainstream, that 70s rock that was real big during that time. So I had access to all that. We had those little tiny portable cassette players. I'd have to hide the stuff from my mom, and listen to the stuff. And so, that got me interested. I just always loved the real heavy stuff.
Right.
I just, wow, this is cool. And, once I started getting teenagers, my teenage years, I think my first album my mom allowed me to buy was on my 11th birthday. And I remember it was Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti had come out, and that was a double album. And I remember Sabotage had come out, right on my 11th birthday. So we're 1975, I believe. And I remember going to the store, and, my mom saw the price of Physical Graffiti. It was a double album, which were like, even back then quite expensive. I think regular albums were like $4.99, which was, and I forgot the double. And she goes, oh, this is too expensive. So then I grabbed the Sabbath album. If anyone's seen the cover of Sabotage, it's got Bill Ward in a leather jacket and red leotard tights, Ozzy Osbourne in a kimono, and and they just like look like complete freaks. And my conservative mom in 75 just looked at the album cover and like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, you said I could buy anything, and so boom, I bought that. 1975, just listened to it nonstop, and that got me into buying records. I was getting, whatever you get as an 11-year-old kid. I don't think I was getting allowance till even later. Like $4 a week, and I'd go down to the used record store and buy whatever I could used. And I just was taping stuff off the little portable tape player off. KMET and K-West were the big stations then. And I just made all these kind of tapes. And then once, I was 16 and I got into the new wave of British heavy metal, that just changed my life, man. I was just so into, when I remember when Ace of Spades just came out on Domestic. It was, there were only a couple albums that were out on Domestic. Ace of Spades, Saxon, Wheels of Steel, and then the first Iron Maiden album came out. Bought that shit up, was reading it in like little tiny blurbs in Circus or Cream. And then we found Kerrang! Magazine. And I know I keep blabbering here. You could cut me off.
No, go. I'm listening. I'm very intent on this.
Yeah, we got into Kerrang! There was a store in Costa Mesa called Music Market, at used records, and it would have the imports. So myself and my buddy from Huntington Beach, Pat Scott, and even before that, I had other buddies that we would go out and buy, some the Maiden and that kind of stuff, and I would turn them onto it. And I would turn them onto it because, as a kid, you didn't have much money. So they would buy a couple albums, and I would buy an album, and then you would tape them off each other, right? So, I would say, oh, you should buy this album, buy this Samson album, And if it was too much, if it was these imports were like $10.99 back then.
Yeah, and that was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money. So you didn't really want to risk it. So you would have your friend buy it and that tape. And then you realize it says Killer. And then so that's what we would do. We would do that. And, and Pat and I would go to the store and And how I ran in, how we found out about Lars Ulrich is actually kind of a funny story. Lars had just moved to Newport Beach from Denmark, and this was about like early 1980, I think. And we didn't know him at the time. Newport Beach is like 10 miles south of Huntington Beach, real close. And Music Market is right in between. It's in Costa Mesa. Might even be closer to Newport Beach. So that was where the hub where we used to buy our shit. Every time we would try to buy, like, Neat Records was starting to come out with, you know, the first Raven single and Tigers of Pantang, blah, 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 and all this Blitzkrieg and Bitch of Sin and all these really cool fucking records. We would go and they would usually get 1 or 2 copies in and maybe, you know, 3 copies of Kerrang! And as soon as we found out that they got something, you know, we would be on the phone calling them. We would run out there, and the guy at the desk said, "Oh, some Dutch kid bought them all." And we're like, "What? Who the fuck else knows about this kind of music other than us? We're the only real metal kids."
Right, right.
And this happened like 2 or 3 times. You know, the guys, and we're like, "Who the hell is this Dutch kid?" Well, anyway, a few months passed, or a couple months, whatever it was, and Metallica, Lars put an ad out. He was just getting into the drums, just starting, you know, playing drums, and he put an ad out saying something like, you know, looking to form a metal band into Motorhead, Tigers of Pantang, and Diamond Head, or something like that. You know, Saxon, Iron Maiden. He listed like 4 or 5 names, and Pat Scott was a practicing guitar player. He wasn't really an efficient player then, but he read the ad and he freaked out. He's like. So he calls the guy up, and a few days later, Pat calls me up, and he goes, "Dude, you got to meet this guy. This guy's got the ultimate record collection, man. You got it. He lives in Newport Beach. I went and saw him," and he's like going off on this guy. And for the longest time, you know, we're talking, and like I go, "I bet you." He goes, "Yeah, he's from like Denmark or Sweden or somewhere out there." I go, "I bet you that's the Dutch kid the guy's talking about.
That guy that fucking took my magazines."
Exactly. The motherfucker that took our shit that we were supposed to buy. So this time I was always thinking, and I remember the first time I met Lars, I'm going, "Wow, how was it growing up in Holland and this and that?" And he's probably going, "What a fucking idiot. This guy doesn't know the difference between Holland and Denmark. I'm Danish, not Dutch."
Right, right.
But of course, the guy kept saying Dutch kids, so I thought. So we you know, Pat takes me over to Lars's condo. He lived with his parents. His dad was a pro tennis player, actually. Played in the older league. He was, you know, older quite then. And Lars had a beat up piece of shit drum set up in the other room, kind of like it was actually kind of in shambles, you know, and. He goes, "Yeah, man, I'm jamming on the drums. I'm going to form this band, blah, blah, blah." And I was just like freaking out because this is Newport Beach, super conservative city, and nice condos.
Right.
Going, "Dude, how could you mean they let you play drums in the apartment?" And I said, "What, you know, your parents don't mind?" No, they're cool. You know, I go, "The neighbors don't mind?" He goes, "Yeah, but fuck them," you know. And I'm like, "Wow, this kid's fucking cool. I like this kid." And we were just in awe of the guy because he had the ultimate record collection, all the imports. And you know, it blew me away as he had like Japanese imports of LA bands, like, you know, like the Runaways or Legs Diamond and all this stuff. And he had like all the, I don't know if you're familiar with the Japanese band Bow Wow. They were like one of the first Japanese metal bands back in like 74, 75. And he had like all their albums. And you may remember Japanese imports were like $20 back then.
Yeah.
It was like, holy shit. And he had, you know, like Priest in the East, which was Unleashed in the East, but the Japanese import, and it came with a separate 10-inch single or 7-inch single, which had like Delivering the Goods and Starbreaker and a couple other songs. And that was like cred. If you had that, you were fucking cool. And you know, back then it was all about owning the vinyl. And I know this is something you and Chris always talked about, and kids today just can't relate to. It was like, you know, having that vinyl, especially having a Japanese import of Priest in the East, that gives you bragging rights.
Sure, it does.
Shit. So, you know, he had all that shit, and I'm just like freaking out. And then he would make cassette tapes for Pat, and then Pat would, you know, I would copy them off Pat, and it was, you know, all this old a Diamond Head, because the Diamond Head record was super rare, real hard to find. He had the Soundhouse tapes, Iron Maiden Soundhouse tapes, which even till this day is just ultra rare. I think only 500 were pressed. He had Def Leppard's first single. I mean, the dude had everything. We're just like, whoa. And this was just shit, we read about. So met up with Lars, and it was like, man, this dude is cool, man. This guy, fuck. And this was even before he was in a band, So yeah, we it was just, I was in the right place at the right time. And then, shortly after that, I started my fanzine, Headbanger. And, before that, there were fanzines that were coming out. Brian Slagle had a fanzine called the New Heavy Metal Review before he started Metal Blade. And it was a black and white magazine, but real pro layout, him and John Cornarins. And we would go to the record swap meets. Pat and I or a few other friends and I would go to the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. And that's what we do. You would drive all the way from Orange County to L.A., an hour drive, just to go record store shopping. That's how big it was. And
right.
You would go to Moby Disc or, when Slagle had Oz Records. But before that, they had these record swap meets. And it was crazy. Sometimes they would have raids, like the FBI or the for bootlegs, because people would be bootlegging.
Right.
And they would actually have a fucking raid in the place and close the place down. I mean, serious, like, cops in battle shields and everything coming in, just closing everything out. I mean, it was crazy. And fortunately, I didn't go to any. I wasn't there at any of the raids, but we bought a lot of killer shit from Brian Slagle, and I was really getting into the European metal scene. That was when Accept came out with their first album, and with Breaker, and I mean, even before Breaker, the first two albums, I'm a Rebel, but I think here in the States it was just called Accept. All that old stuff. And and I read about all these bands, Trust, Ocean, all these French bands. And here Slagle in his little booth has all this shit, so, and he's recommending these albums to me. And I'm like, holy shit, this is awesome. I mean, you just wanted to discover the newest, heaviest band. And, we're talking, this is 1980, right. 80, 81, right? And this is when, everything, you had Loverboy, Journey, Foreigner, all that corporate rock, as they call that real melodic AOR rock. And we were into, Sabbath, Purple, Zeppelin, and even Rainbow was starting to go a little commercial, and all these bands were. So we were looking for the next big thing. So, you were into Priest and UFO and AC/DC. And then once they started getting too popular, you had to like go more underground. And this was like the shit. We got addicted to buying anything of this stuff, and got into all these fanzines. I picked up Ron Quintana's Metal Mania. We were pen pals. We would find each other through Kerrang. So, there's Bob Muldowney in New York. All these KJ Downton in Oregon. And all these guys had their own little fanzines or were starting up fanzines. Wayne Archibald in Canada. All these guys, and it was just this really cool scene, and everyone kind of knew each other, and of course Lars knew anyone. You bring up anything to Lars, hey, this guy? Yeah, I know him. Hey, do you have this album? Dude, I've got like 2 copies of it. I mean, he knew everyone and had everything, and it was just cool. And then Pat or Ron Quintana was doing. He had Metal Mania. We were big fans, and I think I wrote a couple articles like on Tigers of Pantang and a couple other things. And then he said, why don't you and Pat do something on the LA metal scene? And I thought, oh, okay, cool, And we were just starting to go to the clubs, And Orange County had the coolest clubs back then. A club called Woodstock, and right next door was Radio City, and those were both in Anaheim. And then there was a club in Costa Mesa called the Concert Factory. And that was the old Cuckoo's Nest. If any of you punk rock fans remember the Cuckoo's Nest, there's actually a really cool documentary about that called Clockwork Orange, I think.
Mm-hmm.
All about the Cuckoo's Nest. If you've seen the very first Decline, not the Decline we all know, Decline 2, Decline of Western Civilization, the first one was
part 1, the punk rock scene.
Right, that was all at the Cuckoo's Nest.
Okay,
and that was a crazy, insane. Like Orange County was the punk rock hub, and all my buddies that I worked with and shit. And again, we're talking 80, 81, into 82. They were all total punk rock dudes, But, so there were only a few real metal heads around, and it's weird. We all knew everyone. Even if we were out of state, we were pen pals and we were tape traders. And Ron Quintana was like the kingpin dude out of San Francisco. And he had a magazine called Metal Mania. And we did this article on the LA scene. And Pat and I had both seen Steeler. And I know I just recently heard a great Ron Keel interview that you guys did. And Ron was talking about how the first version of Steeler, everyone remembers the version with Yngwie, thinking that was the first, but he had a first version with Michael Dunnigan, all guys from Nashville that came out. And it was them and Motley Crue were like the big LA metal bands. And we had seen them a couple times, and we said, well, let's do something on Steeler. And Rat was kind of like the up-and-coming band, and they were pretty heavy at the time. And I don't know if we saw them with Jakey Lee, or I don't know. It could have even been Mark Terrain for all I matter. But it wasn't Mickey Rat. It was between the Mickey Rat and Rat, but it wasn't any of the original members. It was the guys that were in, Rough Cut and Sarge. They all had rotating musicians. So unless you're a diehard, you won't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But anyway, we saw the very early versions of Rat with just Stephen Piercy. And I think he was going by under Stephen Eric at the time anyway. But so we said, all right, let's do like a little – we were fucking 15, 16 years old. We weren't writers. We didn't know what to write, So we're like, wrote like these, little things. And we're like, well, who else? And he's like, we should do something on Lars's band. And I'm like, well, Lars doesn't really have a band. He had just met Hetfield, and they were about to do a demo tape, which ended up being the first – Hit the Lights version on the very first Metal Massacre pressing. And that featured Lloyd Grant. And Lloyd, was a Jamaican guitar player. He's in the movie, The Rise of LA Thrash Metal. Now's a good time for the plug. The Rise of LA Thrash Metal, Part 1 and 2, out now on DVD and digital. Amazon Prime, iTunes, all that. But anyway, Lloyd Grant is in the movie. He actually played the lead on that. And Metallica wasn't really a band, but he wanted to be on that compilation. And he knew Slagle. Like I said, Lars knew everyone. And he knew Slagle from John Cornarens, because him and John used to go to shows together. So anyway, that's how that kind of tied in. And so we said, well, let's do something on Metallica. They're going to have a song on the new Metal Massacre. And we're like, okay, so we're trying to write something about Metallica. I remember I'm in Pat's bedroom at, we're like 15, 16, trying to write an article. And we're like, what the fuck can we say about, and it's like, oh, Metallica, the heaviest band on the new Metal Massacre record, this and that. And then I go, well, and he goes, well, let me call Lars. So Pat calls up Lars. And of course, this is Lars's big break, his first press ever. They're not even a band yet.
Right. And
he hears that we're doing something for Ron Quintana's magazine. And Lars, the salesman that he is, Pat, get your ass over here, man. We'll write something together. Just come over to my house later tonight. And then Pat hangs up and goes, well, Lars said to come over tonight and he'll give me some ideas. I said, well, cool. Go over to his house and come up with some ideas. So he went to Lars's house and they were just making up shit, like, cool things to write. I think Pat came up with, potential to become U.S. metal gods. And he said they both just started rolling, laughing. Because this is a band no one's heard of.
Right.
Not even a band. And like Lars is like, put that in, So he writes that. Then Lars comes up with some stuff. And then he brings it to me. And I kind of start, write a couple things or whatever. And Pat's like, I don't know about this line, potential metal gods. You think will that make me look stupid putting that in there? So he said this about Metallica. And I go, no, that's cool. Leave that in. So a couple months have passed before the magazine was going to come out, because these magazines were like maybe quarterly, the fanzine. So I think we added a couple things. Like I think we added something about they were opening for Crocus. That didn't happen. But they were opening for Saxon. And we put, I added that in there. And then I said, I had just seen this band Armored Saint at the Woodstock. And it was like Armored Saint's second show. It was actually before Joey Vera was in the band. And it's funny. I just told the story. I just was on, Armored Saint are doing a documentary film.
Oh, nice.
just interviewed for that. And I'm also going to be interviewed for a Chris Holmes film, which I'm really looking forward to. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I saw this band Armored Saint at the Woodstock, and it's like, holy shit, these guys were like a mini Iron Maiden. And no band was doing that shit in LA or Orange County, or really not many places in the US back then. You know, everyone was kind of doing your cover songs or doing, you know, your Journey kind of stuff, or, you know, maybe some Sabbathy kind of stuff or whatever. But these guys came off like a young Maiden, and I'm like, fuck, I'm going to write something about this band Armored Saint. And so I think those were the 4 bands we turned in, and boom, that became the first write-up, I believe, ever on Metallica, both Metallica and Armored Saint. So and maybe even Steeler and Rat, but it was very early on. It was in March of '82 issue. It showed up in Metal Mania number 5. But Ron Quintana could correct me on this.
Sure.
That's that. But anyway, that's, to make a long story short, that was the beginning, and that just got you hooked, man. You were like into that scene, and we were going to the Woodstock. Metallica then did their very first show at Radio City in Anaheim, and Patrick and I and our friend Steve Hallis and Lloyd and a few other people. I think Caton from Hyrax might have even been there early on. And this was, of course, was with Dave Mustaine and Ron McGovney. And we saw them there, and then they started doing shows, you know, at the Woodstock and at Concert Factory, and they started playing the Troubadour, and, you know, and this was all before they moved to San Francisco, before they got Cliff in the band. So we're talking really early on. So, you know, again, I was just lucky, man. It's like, you know, you think about all the places you could be during that time, and fuck, that was like the epicenter of metal. And then I was hanging out with Slayer, because they were a cover band. We used to see them as a cover band. And really, Metallica essentially were a cover band too. When they did their first show at Radio City, and their second show, they opened for Saxon at the Whiskey, which was unbelievable that they were able to get that show. But they did all covers except for Hit the Lights. I think they did Hit the Lights. They did like 4 Diamond Head songs. They did a Savage, Lusalito, or Let It Loose, Blitzkrieg, Sweet Savage, Vivian Campbell's old band, Killing Time, and maybe 1 or 2 others. And that was their set. So it was all covers, but nobody knew of these bands, so everyone thought they were originals, you know.
Nice.
Nobody's seen anything that fast, because they would speed up the songs, so people didn't know if they were punk, if they were metal. They didn't, you know, this was the very, very beginning of what you call speed metal. I mean, it was happening in England with bands like Raven and of course Venom and you know, to an extent Motorhead, but you know, this is before the thrash metal term was out. So we're talking early on, and it's like, man, you know, I think about it now, and it's like, you know, it's crazy to think that. But we used to hang out with Slayer, see them as a cover band. They did Priest covers and, you know, Iron Maiden. And then all of a sudden, you know, and again, you can see this in you like the way I just plugged the DVD, Rise of LA.
But the thing is, Bob, and you're kind of dovetailing into one of the reasons I wanted you to talk about this, is because here it is 30 years later, and they couldn't have a better guy spearheading these documentary series.
Well, thanks, man. That's what, you know, I figured that's what was missing. And that's why I really wanted to do one, especially on the thrash scene. And because so many younger guys that are into thrash, I think it's great. You know, you see these fanzines, you see these blog talk things, and you see these, or you listen to these different podcasts or see these websites, and it's like they don't have the story right. I mean, a lot of these people, and even going back to the regular stuff, if you go back to the pioneers of LA hard rock and metal and the other thing, they think that, you know, LA started, boom, with Motley, Rat, and, you know, Dokken, and that was the beginning of it. You know, it was just Van Halen and nothing else. But they don't realize that all these guys, or all those guys in those bands, were in different bands. They didn't know that Y&T, Yesterday and Today, were around since like 1974 playing gigs. Van Halen were opening up for them. They just think, oh, Summertime Girls. You know, people go, oh, Y&T, they were an 80s band. They're like an 80s MTV band. No, all these bands, you know, George Lynch was in Exciter. Dokken was in Airborne. You know, the guys in Rat were all in different bands. And, you know, what's his name from Steve Plunkett from Autograph had a band called Wolfgang, who were one of the big bands. Of course, Quiet Riot was around in the 70s with Randy Rhoads. So, you know, again, I wanted to do that, and I wanted to do the thrash because I think the whole story about that has just got so blurred and everything, and I think it really needed to be said. And on this documentary, I have the original manager from Slayer, and he talks about the beginnings of Slayer and how they struggled playing with the glam bands and how they changed, you know, after seeing Metallica live and hearing Venom. And it's something Slayer doesn't like to talk about, obviously, Kerry King and others, because they don't like to delve into the past. You know, everyone thinks like Slayer just started out as thrash, but everybody started out as just a rock cover band. You know, that's the way it was back then. And everyone was into that scene, you know, and everyone was into, you know, the UFO, AC/DC, Judas Priest. We all came from that same school, and then it kind of branched out into thrash and glam and whatever else. But, you know, and again, this documentary, I think, really tells that story of the beginning days, which really started in L.A. And, you know, everyone's going, well, are you, well, San Francisco was a separate scene, but it was festering in L.A., and then, of course, Metallica moved up there. And once Metallica moved up there, that's when you got, you know, the ball rolling with it, Exodus and, you know, Legacy, who became Testament, Death Angel, all that. And, of course, the San Francisco metalheads were way more into it than the L.A. guys. You had, as I said, Ron Quintana, Brian Liu, you know, Harold O, all these different guys, Bill Hale, John Stranansky, Metal Rendezvous, all friends and pen pals of mine. In fact, John Stranansky is working with me on this, and so is Quintana, but John's actually going to do the narration of the San Francisco one we're doing. So these guys were crucial. I want to bring up the names because, you know, no disrespect to Eddie Trunk and all these people, but they came after. Eddie wasn't a part of this underground metal scene, which I really say it, and not to pat myself on the back or sound arrogant, and I'm not saying this about me. I mean, I was just a small piece of that puzzle. But we helped shape what metal was because it was us, the fanzine guys, the radio station, college radio. Ron had KUSF in San Francisco, even Monty Connor in New York, Gene Curry. I'm getting lost with names here, but I mentioned Bob Nalbandian in New York. All these guys were crucial to developing the scene. Jeff Gilbert in Seattle, KJ Dalton, all these guys, we were friends with the Brian Slagles, Mike Varney, Johnny Z. They were getting tapes and stuff. We were all trading tapes. So they were all just fans as well. They started the labels. That's what started thrash and underground metal. Really, were these guys taking that risk? No major labels would have touched this shit. You know, like Lars said, when they were playing in LA, nobody got it. Nobody cared. And people give credit to the major labels that you know, took these guys on, but it was the independents that brought that catered, that nurtured these bands. It was the fanzines that were doing it. You were even Cream and Hit Parade. None of those magazines were doing shit. The European magazines, Aardschok in Holland, Enfer magazine in France, Metal Attack in France, Kerrang, of course, Metal Forces, Bernard Doe. I mean, you had a whole group of people out there doing the same shit. Malcolm Dome. I mean, all these guys. So it was, and everyone knew everyone. You know, it was really a community of maybe 20, 30 people that made metal what it is today. And I want to say that because and again, I'm not like patting myself on the back. I want to give these guys credit because these guys never got that credit they deserved. And again, not to downplay, you know, Eddie Trunk or any of these big guys that are, like, you know, considered the big metal kingpins, but the guys that I mentioned just now really helped shape, and I know I'm leaving out a few names, and I'm sorry about that, but really helped shape what fucking heavy metal is today. And without those people, it really would be a whole different story.
Right. Well, anybody who has an interest in, all Bob has really talked about are all on the documentary series that you've been doing over the last, it's already been 6 years, Bob, since you started doing this.
Yeah.
6 years, because I was listening back to an old CMS episode that was in 2012, shortly after Chris came back to the show, and right. You were working on the very first one at that point.
Yeah, that's when we started it, and the ball just rolled from there. It's a lot of work, but again, it was fun, and I think, it's, and I knew they're not going to be blockbusters, and they're not going to be big sales, and that was never my intention. I wanted to document history, and fortunately, I had so many great people involved that helped me out doing this. A list too big to name, but I do want to mention my good friend Gina Zamparelli, who recently passed away.
Yeah, I was just going to bring her up here after you were finished because I did want to talk about her a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we could wait and bring that up when the time is right. But yeah, she definitely was a big helping hand, and so many different photographers and people that gave us photos for free. And because, we had a very small budget, a lot of great artists gave us music for free. And, so it was a fun project. I loved it, and it I think it served the purpose.
Well, absolutely. Well, since you brought up Gina, I was not aware that she passed away a few weeks ago. Ron Keel mentioned it when he was on the show 2 weeks ago. And, again, I was not aware that she was even ill, and I guess it was something that came on pretty suddenly. Were you aware of this, and was it a surprise to you?
Well, it was absolutely a surprise. She kept it pretty private. She's a private person. As much as she's on Facebook promoting stuff, I had just heard that she was ill, and I saw that she was off Facebook for a while. And I spoke to one of her good friends, Danny, and she told me that, Gina's in the hospital, but she's doing okay. And I guess, I don't know if she fell or what, but she had hit her head, and she went to the hospital, and I guess they took MRIs and X-rays, and they released her. And I saw that she was back and on Facebook. I think, oh, thank God, she's doing well. And then all of a sudden I hear she's back in, and then Danny and others told me that she had some kind of brain hemorrhage or brain cancer that was in the center of her brain that was inoperable, and that and they were saying at that time it's really just a matter of time because they can't operate. They just so, and that was just maybe a week and a half before she passed. So yeah, it happened all of a sudden.
All right. Well, you introduced me to Gina a couple years ago when I came out to one of your Inside Metal screenings, and very nice girl. I didn't know her at all. I just, met her to say hello and, let her know that I admired what she had done. And talk about Gina a little bit, Bob. I mean, she was one of the very, very early promoters in L.A. that got behind the hard rock and metal scene, and she's another one who basically did this on her own and, got behind a lot of the bands and helped a lot of bands become successful with getting them gigs and promoting them and so on and so forth. When did you first meet Gina, and, what were your experiences with her?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for giving the opportunity to give this tribute to Gina, because it is so deserving, and I wanted to do it on a proper platform, and I think this, with your fan base is the proper platform, because so many people, unless you grew up in LA during that time, you have no idea who she was. But you're right, she was the really the very first female promoter on a big scale shows to promote, large hard rock metal shows. And, we're talking, she was working with Van Halen and all these bands in Pasadena. Early on, she had clubs like Pookie's and the Ice House. She did shows with Armored Saint, Stormer, the first Motley Crue shows. A lot of these bands started in Pasadena before they went on to L.A. It's funny because L.A., Hollywood was the epicenter, I guess, of the hair metal, glam rock, whatever you want to call it. But all these bands started on the outskirts, whether it be Orange County, whether it be Pasadena, whether it be the Torrance area, where your boy Dokken and Rat and Rat was actually down in San Diego, but Great White, all those bands were like in the South Bay, they call it. So there were different areas where bands were playing, and Pasadena was like the kind of metal hub, and there was a great place there called Perkins Palace, which was the big. If you played Perkins Palace, you made it. That's where Guns N' Roses first got there. They 4 shows at Perkins Palace. After you break out of the LA clubs, after you play the country club and maybe the Palace in Hollywood, boom, Perkins Palace is like the stepping stone, Keel, Great White, Rat. I remember seeing Wasp, Rat, and Armored Saint there. Armored Saint, Malice, and Odin, which was just an amazing show. I was actually on the road with Armored Saint. We were all like 19 going to Phoenix and did a couple shows in Phoenix, and then we come out to Perkins Palace and we find out the places. Oh, and Perkins Palace was the big place, like 2,000 seater or something, and there were like 700 people that couldn't get in. It was like way oversold, and it was like a big event. After you play Perkins, Lizzie, in fact, the Lizzie Borden show at the that's on a Decline of Western Civilization, where they do Born to Be Wild. That's from Perkins Palace. So. Alcatraz, a lot of national acts came over there. So, and that was all Gina. Gina brought all those bands. She never did the pay to play. She never screwed over bands. You talk to any band, most bands will always have shit to say about certain promoters, because most promoters, especially from LA, they're shady. As you know, most promoters anywhere. Gina was not. Everyone thought the world of Gina. She never did the pay to play, but she went out and promoted. She did giant ads in BAM magazine, which was the big free magazine, which everyone read. You saw a big full page or center spread at Perkins Palace. She was out every night passing flyers everywhere, long before the internet. She was a promoter. She promoted shows. She didn't just say, hey, you want to play the Whiskey on this Wednesday night? Give me $1,000. I'll give you a slot. You got to sell 100 tickets if you want your tickets back. I'm not going to lift my finger. You got to promote everything yourself. That's what promoters became during the pay to play.
Right.
Gina didn't do that shit. And once she got into the whole social media stuff, she was just helping bands and like Inside Metal for free, posting stuff. She got Angel back on the map. Frank Domino and Punky Meadows. She worked with all these different bands and artists, and she just did it out of the love. And you don't see too many people that do that anymore for music. Nowadays it's all about money. What am I going to get out of it? Me. She wasn't like that.
No, it's me, I, me,
yeah.
I.
Very cool. But yeah, I'm glad you gave me the opportunity. And I think you could talk to Jack Russell, you could talk to Stephen Piercy, you could talk to Ron Keel, you could talk to Tommy Lee, you could talk to Chris Holmes. They'll all say the same thing about Gina. She was wonderful.
Yeah, well, the brief few minutes that I got to speak with her and took a picture with her and, just chit-chatted with her for a few minutes. Very nice girl. I was very sorry to hear that she had passed away like that. And, God bless.
Absolutely.
All right, Bob, 1 hour has flown by already.
Unbelievable, man. 5 more to go. Let's see if we can pull this shit off, Neeley.
All right, Bob. Well, we're going to come back.
I got to say, I'm going to miss not hearing Judge Aiken for a week, but maybe he could call in from where is he at, that gay pride parade or something?
Well, he actually texted me and said he's listening to the show and he's really enjoying this a lot. Well, good. Maybe he'll learn something from it, that fucker. Very nice. Maybe he could call in for a nice sentencing. I'm sure we'll get some feedback from the fans about some stuff that we could kind of do the lead up, and then Judge Aiken could call in with a sentencing. Sure. We'll see. All right. Well, you sent over some music that you had picked out for the show, and I thought maybe we'd play a couple of tunes, let you catch your breath Then I want to come back and I want to talk a little bit more about, the documentary series, what you're currently working on, and, what's in the future, on the table. And, give us some little insight as to what people can expect, on some of the newer releases that are going to be coming out here soon. And, stuff that even I had the opportunity and the pleasure to take place in, as well as Chris. And, let the fans know what they're in for. So we'll come back and we'll do that. So since you sent over this group of music, what do you think I should play here?
Oh shit! I forgot what I sent you there.
Oh,
Neeley.
Well, let me see. You sent. I'll run down the list of bands.
I kind of remember. You want to play some Eden?
Sure. Let's play some Eden. You sent me over a song called "Lost in the Race."
Okay, that was the latter. That was actually with Mike Stone on vocals. That was from a demo which was actually reissued on their CD as a bonus track. We could go with that, or if you want a track from their original album that came out on Enigma in 1986. Eden was a band I used to manage back in the 80s. Why don't we start with Pound It Out? But you might want to forward it up a minute because it's got like this minute intro. Can you do that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Pound It Out was a big, I'll say it was a big hit on KNAC. KNAC, as you remember, was the big station in the 80s, the big metal station, and they were extremely supportive with Eden, as was a lot of other national stations. Z-Rock, the syndicated station that Tracy Barnes worked with, a lot of Metal Shop played it and all that. But the A&R guy left the label just before the record got released, so Enigma just didn't do shit for the band. And even though we were doing big shows, we did a show with your boy Don Dokken in 1986. It was Dokken and Eden, Dokken, Great White, and Eden at Irvine Meadows. And, we were doing some big shows and we were getting a lot of radio play, but the label, unfortunately, didn't do shit once our A&R guy left, which is probably the story from so many bands you've heard from. But that was the politics of the record business back in the day. But yeah, go ahead and play Pound It Out. I think your fans will dig it.
All right, excellent. All right, well, we're going to pound it out here on the Classic Metal Show. Myself and my esteemed co-host Bob will be back. So here it is. This is Eden exclusively here. What, Bob?
On your Classic Metal Show.